Welcome to another episode of the Sun Foundation's virtual clean water celebration, Clean Water Champions. Today we meet a champion who has roots in ancient Japan, and she shares with us a story from her ancestors about the importance of making tough choices. What's a tough choice you had to make that may have saved others' lives? Let's welcome Anne Shimojima.
This story is based on a legend that was collected in Japan in the late 1800s by a man named Lafcadio Hearn. It goes like this. Once in Japan, a long time ago, there was a small village by the sea. Just 90 thatched houses nestled at the base of the mountain. The people there grew rice, and you could see the rice fields all around, and even going up the side of the mountain like green terrace steps. Above the people's rice fields, there was a large temple where they would worship. And above the temple, the largest house in the village. It belonged to an old man named Gohei Hamaguchi. He lived there with his grandson, Tada. Now, Hamaguchi-san was the wealthiest man in the village and so beloved, the people called him Oji-san, which means grandfather. He was very wise, and the people would go to him with their problems, and he would help with advice and sometimes money. It was a fall day. Oji-san was standing on the veranda of his house. From that place, he could see all the way down the mountain, the entire village. First, his own rice fields. The rice had been cut and gathered into stacks at the end of every row. It had been a good harvest. The people were planning to celebrate that night with a festival. He could see the banners and the lanterns hanging at the temple in readiness for the celebration. He could see the people's rice fields, the houses, the beach, and finally, the sea. The air was warm and strangely heavy. It was earthquake weather. And as Oji-san stood there, he began to feel the slow shaking of an earthquake. Now, he was not alarmed. They lived through several earthquakes every year, but this one seemed different. The shaking started deep, deep below the surface of the earth. The earth shook and stilled. And then he looked out at the ocean, and he saw something he'd never seen before. The water was moving in the wrong direction. The water was pulling away from the land. It looked like the water was running away from the land. The people in the village were beginning to notice this strange sight. They were gathering on the beach, pointing to the water, talking to each other. No one had ever seen this before. No one knew what it meant. But Oji-san, standing there, began to remember when he was a little boy, his grandfather telling him of the very same thing happening when he was a little boy. And Oji-san knew what was to come. It was great danger, but there was no time to run all the way down the mountain to warn the people. There was no time even to get to the temple to ask the priest to ring the bell. He turned to his grandson. Tada, he said, light me a torch. The boy obeyed immediately, bringing a lit pine torch. Oji-san took the torch and ran down to the edge of his first rice field. He hesitated for only a moment, looking at all his work for the past year, all his wealth. And then he raised the torch and lit the first rice stack. Immediately, it burst into flame, the black smoke billowing into the air. He did not hesitate. He ran to the second row and lit that stack, and then ran to the third row and lit that stack too. Tada ran beside him, crying, Ji-chan, Ji-chan, what are you doing? What are you doing? The old man did not answer, just kept lighting row after row. Tada ran back to the house weeping. He thought his grandfather had gone crazy. Finally, the old man lit the last stack. He dropped his torch. He went back to his veranda, and he waited. It was a priest at the temple who first saw the black smoke billowing into the air. Ah, he thought, Oji-san's rice fields are burning, and he began to ring the bell over and over and over until finally the people who were still standing on the beach, still staring at the water, which was still pulling away from the land, at last the people turned and looked up the mountain and saw the black smoke rising. Ah, Oji-san's rice fields are burning. We must help. And they began to run up the mountain, every man, woman, and child, for the old man was well loved. It was the young men and women who reached him first. Water, they said. Where's the water? We'll help you put out the fire. But he said, no, let the fields burn. What? Let the fields burn? But why? There is great danger, he said. Everyone must come, everyone. And gradually, they did all come, the young children running up, the mothers with the babies upon their backs, and finally the old people leaning on their canes. And when he saw that everyone was there, he said, yes, I lit my rice fields. Look to the sea. And everyone turned and looked at the water, which was still pulling away from the land. And then, before their unbelieving eyes, the water rose up into a solid wall of water, high, higher, impossibly high. And that wall of water began to rush towards the shore, tsunami, the great wave. And that wall of water raced to the shore and crashed upon the beach, sending the wood from their houses flying through the air. And then the water pulled back and rose up again into a wall of water that raced towards the shore and crashed upon the beach 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, but each time growing weaker and weaker, until finally the water settled itself back in its ocean bed, dark and uneasy. And the people stared at the wreckage of their houses, at the beach where only moments before they had been standing. That, said Oji-san, that is why I burnt my rice fields. And one by one, the people turned, and one by one, they sank to their knees and bowed to the old man who stood before them, once the wealthiest of them all, now a poor man. But he had saved 400 lives. Come, he said, my house still stands, and the temple too. There is room for many. Come. And he turned, and he led the way.
The bell is ringing. With climate change and the impact on the polar ice and ocean currents, the fire needs our attention. Inspired by this story, it makes me think about what are some ways that we can help to wake up our community. We can motivate them to do what needs to be done, so together as community, we become clean water champions.